So let's get it out of the way. I am a baby when it comes to horror movies. So when I keep hearing these comments about Longlegs, oh my God, it's one of the scariest movies ever made.
I'll be waiting.
You know, I was like pretty hesitant on going in to see it because personally, this is the type of horror that I find the scariest. Anything like Zodiac is the scariest movie I have ever seen. That's one of the few films that has ever actually given me a nightmare. What I was hearing about Longlegs, I was like, okay, this is a movie that is meant to disturb me to my core. And I don't know if I'm going to be able to see this, but I was also just kind of curious to see if the mainstream critical consensus of this movie, if it was essentially just too overblown. Was that something that over-exaggerated and actually did a disservice to the movie? And that's why I was kind of going into Longlegs with. And boy, is Longlegs a very evil movie. And sorry, I'm looking down at my notes because I really want to get all my ideas on Longlegs shared because I have a lot of them. And very few movies are this evil nowadays. This one has no moral compass. I can't say I've seen a film recently that just doesn't have a moral compass. It's devoid of anything even resembling kindness. And to not spoil the movie, Longlegs follows Maika Monroe as FBI Agent Lee Harker on the search for a satanic serial killer only known as Longlegs that has ties to Lee's past. Maika Monroe, Alicia Witt, and Nicolas Cage star. And let's just start with that last name that I mentioned right there, Nicolas Cage, because that's the guy that stood out the most to me, and that's who I really want to focus some time on with this review. Nicolas Cage, wow, what a performance from him in this movie. It's deeply unsettling what he does in this movie. It's disturbing. It's a psychotic performance, and that's even at the standard of Nicolas Cage, who we know who Nicolas Cage can be as an actor, and the standard that he sets himself as. It's a pretty horrifying to see him on screen. And then when he's off screen, you're kind of just wondering the whole time, where is he? Like, there's this eerie presence that's ever near when he's off screen. And the entire time you're watching, it just feels like he is looking upon you. It's voyeuristic almost. It's dreadful. He feels all-encompassing in the narrative of this story. It is... what a performance from him. Like, bravo. This is, hats off, one of the best performances I've seen in quite a while. This is one of Nick Cage's best performances. Like, I would easily put that and qualify that in this conversation. And I was really impressed with that because that really is the juice of this movie. And the movie is so unsettling. Everything that works about this movie revolves around this guy played by Nicolas Cage. And everything about this movie kind of matches his energy in some way, and this film is very off-kilter, especially with the performances from Maika Monroe, and it borrows the archetypes of someone like Detective Starling from Silence of the Lambs, but somehow it's 10 times more soul-crushing when Monroe does it in this movie. She is essentially a corpse walking in Longlegs. She feels so disconnected from the sense of reality, and everything she feels is so deeply awkward and personal and foreign. You don't really have a read of this person in a way that never like allowed you to hold on to anything of substance in this movie. And so you're with this person the entire time that you're like, something feels off about them, but you can't place your fingers on it. And then you're off the opposite side with Nicolas Cage and you're like, well, something's definitely off with that guy. And it just all works to really wonderful effects. And the director of this film, Oz Perkins, who, by the way, his father is Anthony Perkins, Norman Bates from Psycho. Is that his name? I think it's Bates. I know it's Bates. I don't remember if the first name's Norman or if I'm mixing that up. But the killer from Psycho, that's his father. And it feels like that in this movie. Like, you certainly see Perkins playing with the Psycho mythology and also all serial killer movies. This is a guy that's clearly seen most, if not all, of the serial killer movies, and he brings that into this movie. And what he does is he's weaponizes both of these performances from Monroe and Nicolas Cage, and they serve as two wonderful polar opposites for each other, where Harper is quiet and reserved, Longlegs is explosive and mean and cruel. And it's fascinating to see how he weaponizes them and deploys them in certain moments of this film. And what I love about it is just specifically this performance from Cage a little bit, to go back to it. It's such a loud performance from him, and he's such a showboat. It's such an egotistical performance that he gives Longlegs in this movie. And I found it interesting. I would really recommend watching it, I should say. Oz Perkins, the director, just did a sit-down interview with Sean Fennessy over at The Big Picture about this movie, Longlegs. And there they talked about Oz Perkins' feelings about serial killers, the feeling, the need to mock them, people's obsession with these people. And in that, he portrays Longlegs as deliberately portrayed as something of a loser in this film. And not like loser in the sense of he's a guy with glasses that everyone ignores, but in the sense of his objects of fascination are stupid. His way of speaking, his body frame, the music he chooses to listen to, his lifestyle, his composure, the way he dresses, it really does go out of its way, and Perkins goes out of his way, to kind of just make fun of Longlegs, and is like, this guy has nothing. This guy is such a pathetic waste of human space. It's a really funny portrayal of a serial killer that also works to really wonderful effects to bring forth the horror, because this guy doesn't have anything physically intimidating about him. And I love this lens of which he views this character in. And with that all to say is, it's this pathetic human being, but he's especially capable of horrific crimes. But he himself is not intimidating. And Cage being so capable and willing to match that energy with that wild and often funny performance that you get out of Nicolas Cage as an actor, it leads to something that feels so singularly specific that I can't really point to anything else that's come before it. And that added a level of excitement and horror to the film when I really couldn't say that I felt like I had this feeling ever before watching a movie. And this movie is not nightmare-inducing, but it is a movie that I found myself when walking out of the theaters. I kind of did this, or even in my car while I was driving. I actually checked the back seat while driving because I'm like, something feels weird. It's just a movie that kind of stuck with me in an unpleasant way. And the film's really beautifully shot. And Longlegs is a really beautiful film to look at. It's clear that Oz Perkins loves his linear framing devices. Kind of think Wes Anderson, almost to a point. And in this, it especially works because the linearness of the way that he composes a shot really feels in line with who this character of Detective Harker works, the way she processes things and new information and places them in a piece of a puzzle. You really feel that through the structure of the camera in this movie. And I think that's a really brilliant way to explain her mythology and an interesting way to visualize it. And yet with all these things, and I'm singing this film's praises, it's very clearly this film has a lot of greatness in it and a lot of things that I really like. And yet I found myself a bit deflated by this movie at times and by some of the film's choices. I think Oz Perkins is a very capable director, but this film suffers especially in its narrative issues, especially in the second half of this movie. This is a film that is purposefully supposed to feel, unsatisfactory, I believe is the best word, in its conclusion. It's actually a part of the horror that it's supposed to be unsatisfying and doesn't have perfect resolution. The fact that it doesn't have a clear-cut resolution actually makes it a little bit scarier in a lot of ways. And this film, with refusing to give resolution really anywhere or any moment, and that's not just the end of the film doesn't release itself often. It doesn't have that valve to release the pressure and anxiety. Think of another film like Seven, that moment where they are investigating the person who's basically been kept alive, starved to death, and it's the corpse, and they get right up into the corpse faces, and then he breathes and everyone freaks out. That's a very jarring, upsetting moment in that movie. But it also works to kind of just reset you for a second. It's kind of the being able to scream on a roller coaster, right? Where you get it all out and now you can catch your breath again and then get bottled up again. This film doesn't really give that. There's a few jump scares here and there, but it's a film that largely keeps you bottled up in dread. And that works for the film really largely for the most part. But it's also to keep that tension and to keep that energy. It sacrifices this thing in its story structure. And it's a film that doesn't really care about keeping the time frame of the story straight. And so you get scenes out of order or in flashback. And I noticed that I lost that feeling of tightness at moments because I was kind of just confounded and confused by the decisions in which this movie took place and trying to follow the story. Essentially, it kind of took me out of the horror and made me remember that I was watching a movie and trying to actually analyze what the movie was trying to do. The story just became too distracting, or I should say, not even the story structure of the movie became too distracting for me. And it really hurt me, and I was quite frustrated with it at times, especially as the film added complexities and structure. I just don't think it led to anything greater. If it led to something, I'd probably excuse it or maybe even go back and recontextualize it. It's the issue where I think the whole time I knew where this movie was going. Like, I really did feel like I had the logical conclusion of where this movie was going to end mapped out from maybe the 10-minute mark of this movie. I would not say this is a particularly original story, and it's probably because it is borrowing so much of other iconography in serial killer movies. But at times, this film then has the issue where it just kind of stops dead in its tracks because it realizes it needs to give exposition because the scene's coming up soon, and you need that realized context because the reveal is literally going to be forthcoming. And to put it simply, when it's all said and done, Longlegs is experimental in that way, and I really appreciate it, and that gives some really good horror moments within it. Like, there is some really quick, abrasive moments of just seared in my memory horror that's going to be hard to escape. But with that all just kind of said, the ending, which I won't spoil by any means, I wouldn't call it original per se. And at times the film even stops, like I mentioned, and it kind of just has to like do a lot of the heavy lifting that the film otherwise wasn't doing. And this experimental nature, this intense serial killer, what works about it takes away those moments that work great in those components, and it takes the punch a little bit out of it. The movie lacks a punch. And I think a bit more of linear structure would have really helped provide more scares, because often I just found myself confused while watching this movie. And I think what Oz Perkins is trying to do with this is he's trying to avoid the traps of procedural dramas, and specifically procedurals as they are so often portrayed in serial killer movies. But the issue with the format is, of course, it's a format for a reason. It's a proven formula. And in this movie, trying to subvert said cliches, you actually led to more leading yourselves into more cliches and more story moments that kind of fall flat, and moments that felt very heavy-handed as a director and specifically as a writer. With that all said, though, I can recommend Longlegs. It's not a movie. I thought I was going to have nightmares last night. I did not. I did tell my Amazon Alexa to power down the lights to 5% because I just didn't want to exist in the shadows like this movie does, because that is where the horror of this movie is. This movie is the seen and unseen, and specifically in this movie, the unseen is the horrifying. But it wasn't a movie that I'm saying is sticking with me. 24 hours in, I don't feel deeply affected differently by seeing it. And maybe that's going to be nice for some people. I went with a friend yesterday, and he said this movie scared the crap out of him. Like, this was a really upsetting movie to him, and he was going to remember this one. I don't have that feeling, and I think what's shocking to me is I thought we'd be the other way around. I thought he would be the one who says the technical brilliance of this movie, how well mastered it is, and then I'm the one who was like, I'm just scared too much to even really think or review this movie or process it. We kind of came out the other way. He was the one kind of struggling to even put to word his emotions, And I was the one like, okay, here's what I did like. Here's what I didn't like. Here's some of the story structures that I had issues with. Here's what I thought was done really well. Ultimately, this is a pretty well done serial killer movie that never quite gets to great. I think it is a solidly good movie, though, and I would recommend it. And just adjust your expectations. If you are expecting the scariest movie ever made, just take that out right now. Don't listen to any of that. Don't listen to that hype. If you want a good serial killer movie, it's going to be hard to suggest you're going to find one better than this, especially recent. It's been kind of not a ton of these movies are coming out, and this one does it to a very effective degree. So I can certainly suggest Longlegs. It's going to be too evil for some people. Some people aren't going to be able to handle that. If you're able to get on board for this movie and work up the courage to see it, I really do highly suggest it, because I think there is a lot of really special filmmaking in Longlegs, even if the story fell a little short for me. I'm giving Longlegs 3.5 out of 5 stars.